So throughout today's course, we've been talking a lot about helping ourselves with anxiety and using therapeutic supports to help us with managing our anxiety symptoms. So for this last portion, we're going to focus on how we can have support from our loved ones. These are the people that we see every day. These are the most important ones in our lives. And I think a lot of times our loved ones just aren't sure how to help us with anxiety. So if you're watching this alone, now's the time to go grab your spouse, your mom, whoever, someone that's important to you, and have them watch this last portion with you. I think one of the biggest parts of being able to support our loved ones who experience anxiety is knowing about anxiety. So just like everyone here today that sat and learned about their anxiety symptoms, their anxiety diagnosis, how anxiety works within our brains and affects our bodies. That helps to understand how anxiety works and how we can help manage it. Same thing goes for our loved ones. Our loved ones can take the time to really become educated on all of these things. When they better understand, it allows us to be able to have conversations on this topic. I often hear from clients that maybe their mom, their spouse, their sibling tells them, just don't worry about it. Easier said than done, right? So all of us with anxiety know that if it were that easy, we wouldn't worry about it. We wouldn't have anxiety. But I think a lot of times those people who are telling us that really mean well. They want us to feel better. They don't want to see us worrying. They don't want to see us skipping fun events. They want us to live our lives fully. But they're not really sure how to help us do that. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that our support system can do in order to help us manage our anxiety. So another important part of being in a support system is being able to validate and empathize with our loved ones who are experiencing anxiety. So for instance, again, I've had many clients who have come to me and said, so-and-so, my dad, my sister, whoever, told me, just get over it. Gosh, I'm so tired of this. And I think it's true. Our loved ones do get stressed. They get overwhelmed by this, just like we do. We're all experiencing it together in some way or another. So when our support system tells us, just get over it, I don't think that's necessarily a helpful thing for anyone. It's really just an act of frustration. So what do we do? Validation. Validation is key here. It's so important as a loved one and a support person to be able to acknowledge these symptoms. Man, you're looking really stressed today. What's going on? Let's talk about it. Being able to say, I understand what you're going through is important. Being able to understand that you're not just making it up is really important. So part of validation is also being able to empathize. As support people, it's important to be able to put ourselves in the other person's shoes, to try to think about what it might be like to experience those anxiety symptoms, what it might feel like to worry about having a panic attack, what it might feel like to be in that sort of stressed state so often. When we put ourselves in our loved one's shoes, we really start to see things from their perspective. We start to understand that it's not something that we can just get over or change. We realize that it's going to take time. It didn't start overnight, and it won't be fixed overnight. Another thing that we can do as a support person is start a conversation. Ask your loved one, what would be helpful? What do you need from me? What can I do? Instead of just assuming these things. Sometimes we really mean well, and we try to help. And we do this by trying to continuously reassure that person that everything is going to be all right. It's probably not very effective. That person is doing that for themselves and it's still not working. So sometimes it can be helpful just to ask, what would be helpful today? Is it just being able to sit and talk? Is it going for a walk for a coping skill together? Maybe you can learn to do yoga. Yoga is a phenomenal way to manage our anxiety, be mindful. Maybe that's an activity that you can do together. Find something that will help that person, that they think will help, and that you're willing to do and able to do. So some of you might be thinking right now, you know what? I really want to say, like, I get you, but sometimes I don't. Sometimes those thoughts are so irrational that it's hard to really comprehend why our loved ones are experiencing them. So, for instance, if I am a social butterfly, I love going out, I love talking to people, it might be hard for me to understand why my loved one doesn't like to go out, why they experience anxiety in those settings. So, while we might not understand exactly what our loved ones are thinking or feeling, all of us experience anxiety at one point or another. We all have different triggers. So, even though my loved one might not experience anxiety as frequently or as intensely as I do, that loved one can be able to say, you know what? I do feel anxious in certain situations. I kind of understand where you're coming from. Is it like how I feel when I stand up in front of people to give a speech and everybody's looking at me? I know that makes me a little bit anxious. I start to sweat. I worry a lot. Find that piece where you can relate to them and try to understand. I think just trying that, just putting that effort out there is going to mean so much. And you're not always going to get it right. It's okay to ask those questions, ask if this is the same, and sometimes that person is going to say, nope, not at all. And when they do, you can ask, what is it like then? Tell me about it. Tell me from your perspective what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you're going through. Help me to understand. So another way that we can try to relate to our loved one who is experiencing anxiety is finding that kernel of truth. At this point, we all know that anxiety is really rooted in these irrational and unhelpful thoughts. But typically, there's a reason why we're having this. There is something scary. There is something that we perceive as a danger going on. So as that support person, try to find that kernel of truth. All right, so let's say your child comes to you and is super upset about something they experienced that day at school. They were really upset about their friends. They thought that their friends might be leaving them out. Instead of saying, oh, it's not a big deal, it's okay, that happens. Let's look for that kernel of truth and let's try to validate not necessarily the thoughts, but the feelings. And so the kernel of truth here could be that, you know what? We've talked about this before and you're right. Sometimes Sarah and Emily, they just go off and kind of leave you out. That must be hard. That must not feel good. And I bet that causes you to worry a little bit, that maybe you're going to be left alone. By identifying that little kernel of truth, we are validating our loved one's feelings. We're saying that, you know what? That's not unrealistic. However, it is important to take it one step further. After we identify that kernel of truth, we can do some of those things that perhaps we've done for ourselves in our challenging of our thoughts. So as a support person, we can say, yeah, that part's true, but what do you think about this part? Is that as bad as we really think? So we've identified the kernel of truth here, that, yeah, sometimes our friends leave us out. That's true. It's happened to all of us probably. But we can go a step further and look for how this thought might be a little irrational. Maybe we're not looking at all of the evidence here. All right, so let's think about that. In this scenario, our kid comes to us, they're feeling really left out. That's true. That's a true feeling. But let's look at the situation a little bit more. Let's ask, so what about that time last week when you only wanted to play with Emily and not your other friend? And your child might say, well, yeah, I just wanted to have our alone time. I like playing with my other friend too, but sometimes it's nice to just have two people. And that's how we help our friends, our loved ones, our children to understand that maybe we need to take a step back and look at this from all angles. It's hard to do that on our own. So I think that having a support person, a loved one, help us to do that can be incredibly helpful. So we talked a little bit at the beginning about, asking our loved ones what they need from us. I think one really amazing thing that we can do for our loved ones, if they think it would be helpful, is to attend a therapy session with them. Learn about the anxiety disorder. Learn about what they're doing to try to manage these things. Learn about those coping skills so that when they are experiencing these in real life, you have a great understanding and you can help to guide your loved one to using those things so that they do feel better. But if you don't know, you can't do it. So put the effort in that they're putting in as well. And I think ultimately you will feel better and so will your loved one.